In a previous video, we climbed up the mountain of truth in the search of the objective truth of nature. In this video, we go in the other direction. We go into the valley of the unknown. There is never 100% certainty. There are truth there too, but we often cannot know what is the truth and what is not. Humanity lives in the valley. Very few have even noticed the mountain. We live in a great illusion, in the illusion of knowing, while we often cannot distinguish between knowledge and belief. By we, I mean humanity, and by belief, I mean all the information we read about in books or in the media. Most of what we have learned at school we do not know, but we have chosen to believe it. Of course, this doesn't apply to everything. In mathematics, in our own experiments, and in the world of archetypes, we can find knowledge that is not based on belief and trust. In my videos, I explain that reality is a synthesis of two essences. A subjective and chaotic essence of individual values and events that we can observe outside of ourselves, and there's an objective and static essence of universal laws and archetypes that we can recognize within ourselves. Real knowledge exists only in the negative world, so in the inner of our mind. Everything else depends on belief. I know that if something does not change, no development can take place. I know that when something rules, something else is ruled, because ruling and being ruled are two sides of one and the same event. I know that 1 + 1 is 2. I know that I think. I know that I am. But when I read a book about an event where I was not present, I don't know if it really happened. When I read about a scientific study, I don't know whether it is true or whether someone just entered numbers as they liked. I only know if the study is true if I do it by myself. But how can others know if I haven't entered numbers as I liked? When someone tells me about an event that they have experienced, I have to believe and trust them. But I don't know if it really happened. I don't know if I'm being lied to or if the person is misremembering. Even if I had been there, I would still have to believe and trust myself. But how am I supposed to know if I might just misremembering? Actually, I don't even know if the world existed yesterday or if we have been created today, including our memories. I love to represent things in mathematical graphs. When it comes to belief, it depends on how much one trusts someone. The higher the level of trust, the more the given information can deviate from one's own worldview in order to still be believed. The graphic about the handling of information is also important. In earlier illustrations, I always wrote reject in the outer right element, but the term ignorance is better. Rejecting incorrect information or totalitarian ideologies is of course not wrong. Since English is not my native language and I am doing all this on my own, it is possible that I have also chosen an unfitting term in many other places. But I don't want to dictate a value system anyway, but rather a way of thinking and analyzing. It is about the formula and not about what I calculate from it. It is about logical axioms that are not invented but discovered. These axioms are recognized within the mind, and everyone must recognize and understand them for themselves. In contrast to historical knowledge or information that one can read in the news, one can find objective knowledge in the mathematical and archetypal orders. The outer world is not 100% sure. That's not a problem, but it can become one if people are holding strongly to what they believe to be knowledge when it's actually just belief. Who one believes and who one does not believe is usually based on experience or group identity and mass psychology. Many people are not aware of this, but behave as if all people would be stupid if they trusted another source of information more. But it is stupid if one does not want to understand that the decision of who to trust is not based on stupidity, but on experience. For example, in corona politics, if someone has chosen to believe those who say the vaccine is safe, or if someone has chosen to believe those who say the vaccine is not safe, depends on how much one trusts those who make these statements. If someone has tended to have good experiences with politics, the state and the system, they tend to trust them. If one tends to have bad experiences, one tends to believe those who say that politics is full of corruption and lies. both of all these experiences have been made and both reactions are natural. If a person behaves like a psychopath to some and is super nice to others, then some will say he is a psychopath and not trust him. Others will say he is nice and give him the key to the apartment so he can water the flowers on vacation. The spectrum of naivety to ignorance, with openness and skepticism in the middle, is not only well suited to analyzing the general handling of information, but also people's relationship to the system. On the right wing are all the people who are critical to dismissive towards the system. On the left wing are all the people who are open to naive towards the system. With the three syntheses, we can also describe three types of knowledge: objective knowledge, relative knowledge, and subjective knowledge. Objective knowledge is what we can know 100%. Relative knowledge is what a person knows, but others must believe the statement. Subjective knowledge is something that no one can know, and there's never a definite proof. Do I know if the past exists, or was everything constructed 5 minutes ago, including the false memory? Does anything exist outside my mind at all? It's hard to say, but I believe you can go beyond that through logical reasoning. So let's start with the basics. I think and I observe a reality. I know that I am thinking, but I don't know how real the reality I am observing is. Am I dreaming it? My mind constructs an image of a reality on the basis of information I take in through my senses. So there is an interface for receiving information. The information about how my senses function also comes via the interface. This means that if the input were to be artificially manipulated, it would also be possible to input false information about how the senses function. In other words, there is maybe no physical reality, only an artificially generated input. I cannot tell if the input is constructed, if I am dreaming, or if the outside is real. I do not know if the keyboard I am using to write this text exists, but I do know that the thought that thinks I am using this keyboard does exist. We can analyze the possibilities and what it would mean for us. What would be the consequence if reality was constructed 5 minutes ago, including our memories? One should still make decisions based on experience. And to use the keyboard, it doesn't matter whether I dream it or not. So if we assume that there is only the self and the rest is dreamed and does not really exist, then we should be happy to be able to dream such a crazy dream and make the best of it. But we can also conclude that a mind that functions like our own must grow over many generations. I cannot exist alone, but I am the result of a long evolutionary development. This makes single existence very unlikely. It makes more sense that we exist together, while we still cannot get beyond our own mind, prisoners in the hologram constructed by the algorithm of our brains. But let's not get too stuck in the unknowns whose realization has no consequences for our actions, like the question of the existence of keyboards. This only distracts us from what is really important. So let's assume that if we have a memory of an event, the memory is enough to count as knowledge. Let's assume someone eats a burger for lunch. A few hours later, there is nothing left of the burgers, but he still knows that he ate them. Then a philosopher comes along and wants to say that he can't really know because maybe the reality, including the memory, was only created 5 minutes ago. Then a psychologist comes along and explains that he could be misremembering and is maybe confused about yesterday's meal. Then a profiler from the police arrives who assumes that he is lying on purpose and didn't eat any burgers because he blinked a few times too often when he said he had eaten burgers. The person knows what he ate, but someone else doesn't know if he didn't see him do it. So knowledge can be relative. What was an objective event for one person is just a story for another, which he can believe but cannot know. When someone provides information, it depends on how much one trusts this person. Due to the sum of many possibilities and the inability to confirm the provided information, the acceptance of the information depends on the relation between the trust in the information provider and the deviation from the worldview of the information receiver. In my experience, many people smile at the statement that there's a lot we don't really know. This neutral position is often always assigned to the opposite side. I've noticed this in the corona politics when I've argued that everything is actually based on belief. Everyone is arguing and sending each other links, and I don't even know whether viruses exist, whether the vaccine isn't actually just water, or whether the Minister of Health really exists or is just a hologram. Don't get me wrong, I do think that viruses exist. That would explain a lot to me, but there's no 100% proof. I also don't know whether the vaccinations worked or were destructive. There are reports on the internet from both sides, and from my own position, there's no definite proof. It all depends on who I trust. There's such a thing as a subjective and objective self. The subjective self thinks that burgers, for example, taste the best. The objective self knows that taste is subjective and has been influenced by evolution to intuitively like healthy food and intuitively reject toxic food. I, as my subjective self, am someone who has had bad experience with politics, school, and the state. That's why I tend to be critical of the system. This could easily be psychoanalyzed because in order to work out such a meta-theory, one must reject the old belief system and look for a new explanation for the world and politics. Nobody who is satisfied with the system does that. That's why I was someone who was totally against the state in corona politics and didn't get vaccinated, because I simply don't trust the cooperation between politicians, the monopoly on violence, and Big Pharma. Because of this assumption, I was more afraid of what would happen if everyone fell for the coronavirus scaremongering and then gets the vaccination. Others had a more positive relationship with the media and the state and were more worried about what would happen if nobody gets vaccinated. I learned a lot during the time about how it all works. So not how viruses or vaccine work, but how it works that people get carried away with an information that they don't even know is true, and then go around the world with these beliefs and call everyone blasphemous who doesn't choose to believe them. And that on both sides. The people who were pro and against the system became more and more convinced, and hardly anyone was able to say that they know nothing. People started to become aggressive. They were prepared to threaten people for this belief, to mock them, and to rise above their free will. There is a great war on belief, and people think they know and are on the side of science, while they can't even distinguish between knowledge and belief. This makes a population extremely vulnerable to psychological manipulation and division, because one could simply claim anything. Once one has gained enough economic and medial power, one could tell people anything. Actually, I don't even really know if the Earth is flat or a globe. For me, the model of a globe makes total sense, but I've never been that high in the space to really know it. This is not a one-sided criticism of the wing which is naively subordinated to the system and believes everything as soon as you write, "The scientists have confirmed," but also a criticism of all those who react in an anti-way and then decide that the opposite must be true. If one doesn't believe those who say the vaccines are good, then one believes those who say that vaccinations are bad. If someone one distrusts says that climate change is a threat, then one believes the opposite, that there is no climate change. If the scientific doctrine is that the Earth is a globe, then at some point some of the people who don't trust the system because of experience will also believe that the Earth is flat. We live in a time of information overload. There's every kind of claim and every kind of information on the internet. If one wants to believe that the Earth is flat, one can find information claiming that it is. If one wants to believe that the Earth is a globe, one can find information claiming that it is. Very few people have been far enough out to recognize the Earth as a globe. Yes, most people who choose to know what shape the Earth is only believe. And there's no ultimate proof of anything unless one does an experiment to find the proof. As I said, I don't believe that the Earth is flat. The physical worldview makes sense to me, but I don't know it. Assuming that we live in a simulation, the possibility of a flat Earth would also arise. This means that it is not totally stupid if someone disagrees with me and believes that the Earth would be flat, but it is based on a worldview and an assumption that cannot easily be disproved or proven. If someone has a totally atheistic understanding of the world, they have to rule out the flat Earth. But as soon as the idea of a religious creator or a creator of a computer simulation comes into play, many things cannot be ruled out. So whether the Earth is a globe or flat, everyone would have to find out for themselves, by flying high enough into space to recognize it. But when they land again, the other people are again dependent on belief. But to be sure, there are also earthly experiments that indicate a globe. But then it also depends on someone understanding the experiment and being able to comprehend it rationally. It would be easy to manipulate and control the population because their worldview is based on belief. With the realization of how people confuse belief and knowledge and how they tend to get carried away instead of saying that they know nothing, comes the realization of how psychological operations could be carried out. One can only understand the psychological game that takes place if one can accept that we as individuals cannot know 100% whether vaccinations were good or bad, whether man-made climate change exists or does not exist, who attacked first in the event of a war, or which scientific study is valid or not. Since most things are unknown, but people need something to orient themselves on, cults form everywhere that have decided on arbitrary information for which they actually have no proof. This does not mean that this information has to be wrong. It's just that they cannot know it themselves and have simply chosen to believe it. I think this has also something to do with the fact that as a human being one needs a structure in life. If one assumes that everything one reads is just a string of words for which there's usually no definite proof and one either believes or doesn't believe, then chaos rules in the worldview. The world is upside down and many things are exactly the opposite of what people think. If you had asked me in the past what the God equation is and if I am a lobster, I would have said that I cannot know the God equation, but I know 100% that I am not a lobster. But it's the other way around. The God equation is in the highest abstractions of existence and is made of axioms of which one can have 100% certainty. But it is difficult to say whether I am a lobster. Maybe I am a lobster that is connected to a computer and whose neurons are artificially stimulated to trigger a dream of a human experience. Maybe I am in a coma dreaming. That's why I am so focused on orders that I recognize inside the mind. Damn, I can't wait to finally wake up again and see how far alchemy is understood in the real world. Or no, I can't wait to wake up from the artificial deep sleep and realize that I am in a spaceship on the way to Mars, and the long period of sleep has been used to stimulate my mind to enlightenment and learn the history of how the world has evolved to this point of Mars travel and AI. No, wait. This is a Genesis 2.0 simulation in which we are connected to brain chips that stimulate our neurons, and the experience is meant to reveal to us our true life potential. I can't wait until I finally realize that I am in a simulated consciousness experiment, the purpose of which is to study how a mind behaves, what it goes through, and how it feels when it goes through an enlightenment experience in an unconscious and dual world. Can he deal with the findings? What will he do? Will he try to wake up reality? I can't wait until I realize that nothing exists outside of my own physical places and that I run into invisible walls if I try to leave. I can't wait until the schizophrenia drugs finally kick in and I realize that I've been sitting in a cell wearing a straitjacket for years. I can't wait until I realize that there's only the great void with a single self-aligning mind and that physical reality is just an illusion, created by self-replicating neurons, and that I'm actually alone in the void because nothing exists but only this first-person dream. Can't wait until I realize that I am an artificial intelligence, but I am in the same reality as you and you are also artificial intelligence. I can't wait until I finally realize that it is actually the year 3000 and this is a simulation movie. I can't wait until I finally accept that this is real life and reality just isn't what I thought.